In Ireland, the woman who could bless your cattle was the woman who could blight them. The blacksmith who shoed your horse was the blacksmith who could turn his anvil against your landlord. The priest who anointed the dying was the priest who could curse a man from the pulpit and watch that curse land. Because healing and cursing in this country were never two separate traditions. They're the same tradition, seen just from opposite ends. And that's what this whole series is going to walk you through. I'm Lora O'Brien, and I'm an Irish 3 and a priest of the Morrigan. I've been working with this Irish witchcraft tradition for over 30 years, and I've got a master's in Irish regional history from Tuath. So when I tell you the cursing tradition in Ireland sits squarely inside the rest of Irish folk practice and isn't some shadowy fringe thing, I'm telling you that from an academic perspective and from the academic record, but also from the lived practice, not from speculation. So this is episode 1 of a 7-episode series that I've planned on cursing in Irish folk tradition. Over the run of this series, we're going to look at the curses of the Fili, poets. We're going to look at the curses of the smiths and the millers, the widow's curse, and the beggar's curse, the priest's curse and the saint's curse, the quiet curses, the silent curses of the evil eye and the cursing stones, and what survived the suppression, really, that hit this tradition hard from the 19th century onwards. So what I want you to hold on to from this episode, the foundation that I'm building everything else on, is the simple historical fact that the people who could heal in Ireland were and are the people who could curse, with the same skill, the same authority, and the same hands. They didn't have a healing tradition and a separate shameful cursing shadow. They had one integrated tradition with two faces, basically. So I'm going to structure this video in 3 main points. How cursing was actually practised in Ireland, the legal framework that recognised it as regulated speech, and the church's place in the tradition. So point 1, how cursing was actually practised in Ireland. Cursing wasn't something that was done behind closed doors. The 19th century, the 1800s, antiquarians were fascinated by the uncivilized barbarian natives, but they recorded the cursing practice and they noted again and again how public it was, how performative, how deliberately witnessed and integrated into the community. And oftentimes, not every time, but oftentimes, a curse cast in private had less weight or even no weight. So a curse cast in a marketplace, on a church step, at the threshold of the big house, the landlord's house, the wrongful house, in front of a gathered crowd, like that curse had legal and social force because the community had witnessed it. And the form was very specific. There was like a style and a structure to it. The cursor would beat the floor or the ground, raise their hands to the sky, call on God, on Mary, on the saints, even on their ancestors sometimes, name the wrong that had been done, name the person responsible, and pronounce the words that bound the curse to that person. And this wasn't like a muttering or slyness. This wasn't sneaking around with a poppet in a drawer. It was public theatre with legal weight. Now, again, this is not the only way that cursing was ever done, but it is a huge part of Irish social history. And that public witnessed shape of the curse is the first piece that I'd love you to understand if you want to read the Irish cursing tradition correctly and accurately. The privacy and the secrecy that modern people associate with cursing, with the idea that you whisper a curse behind closed doors and hope that it works, that's a much later inheritance, probably from English and continental witchcraft traditions, and definitely from later Christian moral teaching. Because in the Irish form, that public witnessing was what made the curse real. And I want you to notice the second piece that's embedded in that structure. The cursor called on God, the Christian God, on Mary, on the saints, in the same form of address that was used for blessing and for prayer. And this didn't start with Christianity. So in pre-Christian Ireland, this would have been other gods, ancestors, tribal spirits, all of that was being called on, right? But later on then, obviously, the Irish cursing tradition was integrated into the Christian devotional tradition, not opposed to it. This is our syncretic blend and our living traditions. So people cursed in the name of a Holy Mary the same way they prayed in the name of the Virgin Mother Mary, using the same address, the same registers of speech, but just with like opposite intent. It's the magic flows between the opposites, and the notion that pagan equals cursing and Christian equals blessing is very much a modern overlay and very simplistic. The Irish historical record clearly shows something far more interesting and far more honest, which is that the blessing tradition and the cursing tradition both ran through the same Christian framework, both called on the same saints, both used the same gestures and the same forms of speech. So, point 2, we're going to look at the legal framework, and this is part as well of why the public curse was so socially accepted, but also kind of necessary, right? Because curses were righteous. Within the bones of the Irish tradition, you weren't usually cursing just out of badness or spite, right? You had been wronged, and the curse is a form of addressing that wrong. So we have the legal framework, the Brehon law, and the recognition and the regulation of satire. Now, if you want to understand how seriously we took this tradition in Ireland, you have to go way further back than the 1800s Protestant antiquarians who were delighted by the perceived oddness of, quaint Irish traditions. But when you go back to Brehon law, which was our Gaelic culture, the Irish legal system that ran in this country for hundreds of years, if not thousands, before English law was imposed. And you can see in classic texts, academic books that explore all this, like Fergus Kelly's A Guide to Early Irish Law. That would be like the standard academic reference here. And what Kelly documents is that satire and curse weren't random folk practices in early Ireland. They were legally regulated forms of speech. Satire was the province of the filly, the filla, singular, the poet. These were trained professional speakers, trained professional poets who held a status in early Irish society that was second only to the king. These were the descendants of the Druids, really. And the filly could compose praise, which raised a person's honour and standing, and they could compose satire. Again, both sides, opposite ends, which would lower a person's honour and could even physically wound the target. Now, Brehon law treated both praising and cursing as actionable speech. So a poet who satirised someone without just cause faced legal consequences, including a loss of their own honour price. And a target who had been justly satirised had no legal recourse because the satire itself was the legal recourse. It was the justice. And the same craft that could lift up a king with the praise could end his kingship with the satire or the curse of it. Satire that raised blisters on a king's face would disqualify him from rule, from his sovereignty, because now, rightly or wrongly, a physical blemish was incompatible with sacred kingship. It was seen as a sign that this person wasn't fit to rule. We don't do that anymore. We're not ableist. But that's how it was in those days. The poet, in other words, really, held the power to make and unmake the highest office in the land. And the legal system recognised that power formally. Now, I think you're getting probably, if you're following this far, this wasn't just superstition. This was a constitutional law in a society where the spoken word carried legal force in a way that modern legal systems don't recognise anymore. So when you read the early Irish material and you find satire described as a weapon, not a metaphor, it's a category of legal speech act. So the relevant point, I guess, for this series is that the same craft that could heal a community standing or a king's reputation through praise was the craft and the skill that could harm just as easily, take it all away. And the poet who praised was the same poet who satirized, and the same craft pointed in both directions. Now, on the practice side of Irish witchcraft, I will come back to satire properly in episode 2 of this series, but I want to flag it for you now because we're going to be deep in the cursing side of Irish folk magic across this whole series. But I want you to understand that the blessing and the healing of the same tradition is alive and well in Ireland today. The seasonal practice, the household charms, the everyday Irish witchcraft that protects rather than harms, that's here and available to you. I've started to document it month by month in a Simple Irish Spells newsletter, which has free and paid versions. I'll come back to that at the end of the episode. You can get the link below for it. But for now, just hold the thought that what you're learning across this series is one half of a coin that we still have access to in its entirety. I'm not going to be teaching you how to curse in this series, right? Not my place. But there are skills and practices that can be learned that will heal and protect just as easily as they can curse. So learning about one will help with the other. Now, the church's place in the cursing tradition was very strong. So the last piece that I want to set up in this opening episode is the Catholic Church's place in all of this. I guess the Protestant Church as well, but mostly we're talking about the Catholic Church. And most modern viewers, when you might think about Irish cursing, you'd picture something that a Christian community would have repressed, something pagan, something opposed to the priesthood. That's not what the historical record shows. The Irish, I can never pronounce this word, hagiographies, the lives of the Irish saints, written down across the early medieval period, they contain so many examples of saints who would often be priests or monks or, all of that. And they're cursing people so that you have to take the practice seriously as a sacerdotal, like an inner mysteries kind of function of priesthood. I did write a whole book on pagan priesthood if you want to look more at sacerdotal and pastoral sides of priesthood in a modern context. Sold everywhere books are sold. But within the historical record, saints cursed unfit kings. They cursed dishonest stewards or landlords. They cursed anyone who refused hospitality. And the threefold death pattern where an unfit, an unjust, and unrightful ruler or king dies by burning, drowning, and stabbing in quick succession after a saint's curse lands. It recurs right through the literature. And The argument that the academic literature makes or gives us is that the saint's curse and the saint's blessing weren't separate practices. Now, if you're interested in a full paper on this, Kudenko in the book Charms, Charmers and Charming has developed this with some considerable care, so I would definitely recommend that. But anyway, curses and blessings within the sainthood weren't separate practices. They're the same authority pointed in two different directions. The same office, the same theological framework. You're getting the pattern here. The same understanding of the word as binding when spoken by a person with the spiritual authority to bind it. And this continued. It's documented in Irish priests' curses from the pulpit, and they appear well into the 1800s. And honestly, when we go through something such as the marriage equality vote that we had, the referendum, you still got Catholic priests more or less cursing anybody who would vote in a way that they didn't feel that the Catholic Church would approve of, let's say, right? But let's stick to the history, not just the stories I've heard. There's a recorded case from 1872 of a priest pointing from his pulpit, pointing at the congregation, but pointing at a specific parishioner that he believed had vandalized the pews and pronouncing a curse on her arm. And the Munster bishops, so Munster is the southern region of Ireland, but the Munster bishops in 1798 had to formally sanction priests who cursed their parishioners, which means that the practice was so widespread that it required a formal ecclesiastical response, right? Colonial law under the British caught up in 1883 with the Corrupt and Illegal Practices Act, which outlawed undue spiritual influence by clergy in elections because priests were cursing their parishioners' political choices, and it had become a documented electoral problem. And as I mentioned, that's still happening right up into modern times, unfortunately. But the point that I'm laying down here is also going to be the foundation maybe for episode 5-ish later on in the series. It's that Irish cursing tradition wasn't opposed to the church. It ran through the church for over a millennium, over 1,000 years. And the suppression of it that you've inherited, that most of us have inherited as common sense, is really like a 19th century clerical and legal project, not an ancient story of pagan opposing Christian. I've said it before and I've said it again. In Ireland, we have a syncretic blend within our folk magic, within our Christian traditions. There's no such thing as pure Irish pagan witchcraft, right? Because it is a living tradition. Now, I can and do swap out the names of my gods and my ancestors for Mary or Jesus or the saints. If I come across an older charm or a spell that I want to work with, I have no problem swapping out my gods for their gods, definitely. But the flow and the rhythm is very similar. Not much else really changes. So here's what I want you to take from this opening episode and carry with you through the rest of the series, which will hopefully be weekly. The Irish cursing tradition was public, not private. It was witnessed by the community, not whispered behind closed doors. It wasn't shameful. It was structured with its own grammar of gesture and speech, with its own language, effectively, of gesture and speech. It was integrated with Christian prayer, whatever the prevailing religion of the time is appropriate. And calling on God and Mary and the saints in the same ways that was used for blessing and prayer. Earlier than that, it was legally regulated with the Fili, as we mentioned, the poets, under Brehon law, and then later on with the priesthood under canon law, church law. And it was practiced by the same people who practiced healing, blessing, and protection. The two sides of the coin were never split. The same hands held both, the same office, the same craft, the same skill set, the same authority, just pointed in two directions, depending on whether the person spoken about deserved praise or punishment. So if you've been carrying a sense that Irish cursing is like a shadow side of Irish folk magic, the dark twin of the blessing tradition, the part that you're not supposed to talk about, I want you to put that down. And that's one of the reasons I'm making this series, because it's not historically accurate. It's an inheritance from later moral frameworks, not from the Irish tradition itself, even when we were full-blown Christians, right? So what we're going to do across the next 6 episodes, I'm hoping to do a 7-episode series, is walk through how this same coin, the same reality actually played out in practice. So we're going to meet the Fili, the poets. We're going to meet the smiths, the widows, the priests, and the people who held the silent curse. We'll look at that too. By the end of the series, you'll have read the cursing side of Irish folk magic from the inside with the academic record to back it up. So the next episode in this series, please subscribe, like, leave a comment, all that good stuff. And you'll get notified when the next episode comes up, is about the Fili, the poets, and the legal force of satire in early Ireland. So I can see you there, but just one last thing before you go. We've been looking at one side of this coin in this episode, the cursing side, and across the series, of course, we're going to stay on that side for academic and historical literacy reasons and educational purposes, because we're documenting the tradition, but we're not teaching the practice of cursing, right? The Irish Pagan School doesn't teach that practice anywhere, pretty much, right? Not that it's shameful, but just we have a responsibility to the public, right? And there are people out there who are just not ready for that power, right? But what we do teach is the living, blessing, healing, seasonal practice of Irish witchcraft. The other side of the coin, the one that you can actually take into your own home and your own seasonal year, the one that's good for beginners, the one that you can start at wherever you are in your practice, whether you've been in a different tradition for 50 years or whether this is the first you're hearing about Irish witchcraft, right? So that's what Simple Irish Spells is. It's my monthly newsletter that I write, where it's grounded in Irish witchcraft. It's still source-led. It's often seasonally timed. There's free posts every month and a paid tier for extra and deeper monthly content. So the link is in the description below. And again, if you're finding this useful, subscribing to the channel means that you won't miss the next episode. Hit the bell for notifications. We're going to be doing approximately one per week or maybe one per fortnight, depending on what's going on. We have interesting things happening in the family, so I might not be at my desk if I'm helping out with new babies. So, all of that being said, I'll see you in the next episode. Slán.